to introduce Cheryl Ann Kary and Tracey L. Wilkie. I'll start with Cheryl. Cheryl Ann Kary is an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. She founded and is the executive director of the Sacred Pipe Resource Center, a nonprofit organization serving the American Indian population in Bismarck-Mandan. Kary had previously served as the curriculum development specialist at the Native American Training Institute, the research director at United Tribes Technical College, the executive director for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and a grants management specialist at the North Dakota Department of Health. In 2016, she was recognized as a leading lady by the Center for Technology and Business, and she received the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition's Arc of Justice Award for her work in civil and human rights. Cheryl Ann Kary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for joining us and speaking. And I'm also equally as delighted to introduce Tracey L. Wilkie. Tracey L. Wilkie is a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, North Dakota. She currently is the parent coordinator for the North Dakota Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health, which works to develop and implement policies, legislation, funding mechanisms, and service systems that utilize the strength of families. Tracey spent most of her adult career working within juvenile justice reform and child protection services within progressive agencies. She has been part of policymaking, including decision-making for LGBTQ+ youth. She knows the importance of having a voice where decisions are made and is planning her second campaign, running for a North Dakota House Representative seat starting in February 2022. So just next month. Welcome, Tracey, and thank you so much for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to the two of you and take myself off the spotlight.
Thank you, Ming. That was a very nice introduction. It's nice to see everybody here today. I'd like to hear about the Sacred Pipe Resource Center in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Okay, so I'll give a little bit of background, I guess, what I'm doing here. Hi, everybody. I just want to say, first of all, that I am so appreciative for this conference. I think it is way past time that we have had these statewide discussions elevating the populations that we have in North Dakota. And I just really appreciate creating a safe space for Two-Spirit people to come and talk about issues that impact them. So the Sacred Pipe Resource Center started, with a dream way back when. We actually got our nonprofit status in 2014. Well, we started in 2012 with a Bush Foundation fellowship that I'd received to do a survey of the Native population here. And that was the impetus for starting all of the services that we do and that we provide here for the Bismarck-Mandan Lincoln population and then statewide. So ever since our inception, one of the things that we have been involved with is community engagement. So we definitely did not want to be like a social service agency where we're merely just, providing services. Not to say that services aren't important, but the thing we really wanted to promote was community engagement of Native people being able to speak for themselves, to advocate for themselves, and to get involved in their own healing. One of the practices that we also is the cornerstone of what we do is called healing-centered engagement, which is, to me, the step beyond trauma-informed care. Because healing-centered engagement recognizes your trauma as a part of who you are, but also recognizes that in order to heal from trauma, we have to be engaged in our communities, and we have to be willing to go out and to advocate for not only ourselves, but the other people who are also going through their healing processes. So that's kind of the foundation of what we do. The relevancy, I guess, to me being here today is our foray into creating societies. So one of the things that we also do is really try to reinforce our tribal practices. And one of our tribal practices on the Northern Plains here for young people especially is to create societies, which are groups of individuals that have shared interests. And so we do have right now we have a Native Youth Wellness Society, which focuses on physical health and mental health and good nutrition. So, you know, taking care of your body and your mind and having wellness, a philosophy of wellness. And then the other society we have is, well, it's still in our beginning stages. Well, they're all kind of in our beginning stages, is a men's wellness group. So again, the focus, because so many Native women, you know, when we went through trauma and all of the things that we did during colonization, we really didn't lose our role as women, but our men lost their role as hunters, as warriors. And so how do we help Native men regain their role in our societies and to celebrate those roles? And then the third one is our Two-Spirit Society, where we are trying to create safe spaces, and we work, you know, obviously there are a lot of other groups that are working on this sort of advocacy too, but we wanted to work specifically on the intersection of race or cultural identity and Two-Spirit identity, because we know that there's a lot of layers involved there, and there's the potential for additional trauma when you're trying to find your identity both as a Native person and as a Two-Spirit person. And so so that's kind of where we're at, what the things that we're working on. And you know, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'll turn it back over to you, Tracey.
Hello again, everybody. I guess I'd like to share a little bit about my story and the work that I do in the LGBTQ community. I was raised on the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and as children, it was like we all knew who was who, and I'm fortunate enough to have grown up with elders who were accepting and not judgmental. It was a strong Catholic community, but we were accepting and raised as brothers and sisters with everybody. And there's so much work to be done, and educating people, everybody, and sharing information on what we know. As Ming mentioned, I work for the North Dakota Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. It's a national organization, and our office is run out of Bismarck. And part of my job is advocating for families, and recently going to appointments, mental health appointments, going to court with people who don't just identify as male and female. We support everybody. And with that, I'm seeing our children struggling right now, all children. And I guess I'm looking forward to being part of improving our system in the way our children's human rights are addressed. Part of my past is I worked in a model site for juvenile justice reform, and we were one of the first in the state in the early 2000s to change the way youth were housed and youth were treated by who they identified. It was a beautiful, wonderful experience to have shared and built. But I know, like, working inside having worked inside, and we all know the society we live in, not everybody is willing to change, and that could be very difficult. But I guess we're all here today, and we got that warrior spirit to continue on and making sure everybody's rights are honored. And coming here today, I'd like to honor a young lady I met, the first youth who received dignity, and I worked with her for a whole year, and I call her Scarlett, and she was a beautiful young lady. Before her, after working with her, she had a successful suicide, the only youth we ever lost in our facility. And I'd like to honor her today for giving me the strength to continue the fight for our youth in a better world. Language. I'll turn it back over to you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Tracey, for sharing that, because I know that's really difficult. And thank you for honoring her in that way. That's a lot, a lot of us have that personal experience that helps create that compassion for other people. And one of the things that I found within the state of North Dakota is that we have a unique culture here in North Dakota. And one of the things that I've been working on over the past, 6-8 months is working on training, workshops, activities, anything like that, that will help us to really begin examining the culture within North Dakota. I think as Native people, we have been very honest about sharing our trauma, our cultural trauma. So I've been a part of many trainings that have been about historical trauma. And yes, this is why we are the way we are today. We've been through this trauma. We recognize it. We recognize that it had an impact on us, both positive and negative. And I think part of this whole education process that is necessary in the state, especially for Two-Spirit people, is really getting everyone to take a look at themselves and where they come from and what kind of experiences that they have had that may lead them to be more compassionate people. I find in North Dakota that because we have this settler, colonizer, occupier history where, we came in here and there was no government set up. There was no, there was no framework. There was no structure. It was just like, oh, there's free land. Go help yourself and good luck. Because people were sent here without any kind of resources and without any kind of structure and without any kind of support, a lot of times we have the that has impacted our culture today. That has impacted the way that we, distrust government. That has impacted the way that we idolize military and force and, the 7th Cavalry. That has manifested itself in this pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just suck it up and live with it. This toughness. And so there are some positive things about that, to be sure. We're independent, we're hard workers, etc. But there's the downside that we don't often examine, and that is this real lack of compassion and this real conformity. Nope, you got to act this way, and you can't act outside of that because there's no room for that. I don't know how to deal with that. And I think that's really something that we need to work on in North Dakota, this self-examination, because I think it's one of the reasons why so many of our kids feel that stress of not being able to explore their own identity, not being able to talk about who they are, and not being able to share that with other people because they're afraid of that being ostracized and being judged and all of that. And you really have to have within your own culture, that value of humility in order for that compassion to be a part of who you are. And I think that's why, as Native people, our traditional cultures, when we look back at our past and our history, we can say, yes, the Two-Spirit people were an accepted part of our society. They weren't looked down on. By the same token, I have to say this, to be fair, they weren't always revered either. I mean, I've seen some things that history has written about, all Two-Spirit people were revered and they were holy. And it was like, no, you had to earn that, by how you contributed to the community as well. So, but there was a place there, there was a space there, and it was a safe space because we looked at nature around us and said, nature doesn't have only two genders. Nature has all of these different manifestations of nature and human beings. And that's okay, because we don't know. And I think having that as a basis for our cultural upbringing and our cultural values has made it easier for us to say, yes, Two-Spirit people are Two-Spirit. That's just the way they are. And that's how we should accept people. But I think for for the state of North Dakota, we really have to look at our culture and the trauma that the people here went through in order to understand the reaction. And then how do we work through that, right? So one of the things like our Two-Spirit group has talked about is doing like a little education process for people in the community. What's the difference between the term lesbian and gay and transgendered, and what is a cis, and what is, all these, what's the difference between gender and sexual orientation? Because I think people just lump everything together and they don't understand all the fine details, which I think is also evident when talking about racial and cultural identities too. Like people tend to say, oh, you say the word white privilege and it's, oh, you're calling me a racist. They're different terms and they mean completely different things. And so you need to educate yourself. So that's a big part of what our Two-Spirit group is kind of trying to work towards. I've been babbling a little bit too long, so Tracey, I'm gonna throw it back to you.
Well, excellent work, Cheryl. That's exciting. I think it's important to mention part of the history also with the Two-Spirit in North Dakota. Just like all communities, we have been colonized and had to pick two genders, and in the 60s, we seen a resurgence of the Two-Spirit societies and our people reclaiming who we are and standing true to who we are. Like Dr. Cheryl said, it's it's so important to continue to teach our youth and to seek to understand one another, to honor our ancestors. I was researching like some of the past and like some of the French settlers that came through, and the writings of his name is René Goliandi, I think is how you say it. And in 1564, they arrived in Florida and are what we know as Florida today. And he talks about a really tall, beautiful woman. And then later finds out that she has both parts, and how she, like Dr. Cheryl said, you had to earn that spot as a sacred person, but she was part of serving the food and being part of the ceremonies. And so there's lots of documentation, that it was very accepted, and we did see the resurgence in the 60s. And I see in schools, now, like how the youth have places to go in groups. And I like what Dr. Cheryl's doing and other people across the state. The Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa is a little piece of history. The Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa was the first tribe in the state to acknowledge same-sex marriage. And my relatives, the Lattisers, were part of that. And other people, doing great work are some of the churches and people everybody getting involved in the community. I have this friend, his name is Cardinal Redbird, and he did some planning for a Two-Spirit Society and Alliance. And we were part of offering a couple classes, trans yoga and LGBTQ yoga. And he wants to be part of the education process also. So I'm thankful to call Dr. Cheryl Kary my friend, and and I love the work she's doing, and that's one step closer to us advocating for change. I know I've been to some of the Sacred Pipe educational to educate the public on what goes on at the Capitol. Cheryl could tell you about what she does with that, but hopefully someday soon we'll have more of our people advocating.
I'm glad you said that, because it is a good segue into just having a discussion about the whole term Two-Spirit, which I think is important. Also, part of our education process is letting people, well, what does this term mean? And I think that Native people, there's so much that I think our cultures can teach and can share. And seeing all these like different prophecies that it's like this rainbow tribe that will be created, and that people can share with each other and can like understand different perspectives and different value systems, just by communicating with other people and being open to learn about other people. And I think and obviously I'm biased, but as a Native person, I feel like we have so much that we can share with other people. And one of those is the whole concept of Two-Spirit, which is the recognition. So in the United States, when we talk about LGBTQ, we put sexual orientation at the forefront. And I think that's just, again, that's a part of our United States trauma, this whole idea that things revolve around these puritanical norms, or these, religious frustrations, whatever we want to call it. But that's where that comes out of, where when we identify someone who is LGBTQ, what we're talking about is their spirit, what's inside of them. So the terminology Two-Spirit is not about what you do in the bedroom. It's about how you identify as an individual. It's about how do you view yourself as a person that must go out in the world and interact in the world with other people and find your place in community. And so I think that's something I really like the term Two-Spirit, because it really it makes people, because when people hear the term, they're like, oh, well, what does that mean exactly? Well, to say it means LGBTQ really like oversimplifies it. That's not exactly what we mean when we say Two-Spirit. What we mean is that person that carries aspects of themselves that are from that have this duality about themselves. They have this duality, and we see that in the natural world. So a lot of what we like as Native people we have this saying, as above is below. And so we have this idea of there's this constant duality in the universe. And some people have the fortune to be part of that duality, and that's where two-spirit people come in. And so this idea that, yeah, that they did hold revered positions historically because of that duality, and it didn't have so much to do with the sexual orientation, the way we put that to the forefront today, but more of how you perceived yourself as a spirit and how you went out into the world then to find your place. So I think those are things that we need to have discussions of too, because again, we are like religious upbringing in all of the different parts of this nation as we were founded impacted how we view LGBTQ. And so you can see some places where there's more acceptance, and then some places where there's a lot of, there's still that conversion therapy and all that, garbage going on. A lot of that is really influenced by that notion that it's a religious and a moral identity, rather than that's just a natural part of the universe. And so the more you learn, obviously, the more you learn that the natural world very closely reflects this idea of duality, and it opens up this idea that there are all different ways of being, male seahorses that give birth to babies and take care of babies, or the idea of animals when they're confined to even being able to switch genders. And so there's all these things in there. So as Native people, we say, there are natural laws of the universe. And if that natural law is that there are animals that can switch genders and there are animals that have both genders, then who are we to question natural law? That's the natural law of the universe. And so I think those are things that are important, and the things that we as Native people can bring to the conversation that are important, because they give people, they open up a space for people to think about a different way of looking at two-spirit and looking at individuals.
You're good, Cheryl. You have a lot of wonderful information. I guess, like, for me, like, this is my ancestral homeland. I didn't say that in the beginning, but in Fargo is the ancestral homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Dakota, some Dakota. It's like MHA, a lot of many tribes called Fargo their ancestral homelands. And the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition did a t-shirt that had Fargo is not Portland. Well, having lived and worked in the Portland, Oregon area for 24 years, coming back home was a culture shock after being gone for so long. And it didn't take long to realize the work that has to be done with improving where we're at with our LGBTQ rights. And there's a lot of the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition. I was like, yes, Fargo is not Portland, and it doesn't have to be Portland. We don't have to do Portland, but we could do better with the way people are treated, and being included and accepted for who we are, and having restrooms available to us. And I was going to go somewhere else with that, but I have to be at, just so you all know, I have to be in court at 1:30 with a family through my job. And I'll be signing off here in about 7 minutes.
Awesome. I think you bring up another good point too, Tracey, about, just the being willing to be flexible about how we create the policies that we create and the spaces that we create. And I think that it is one of the things that's very difficult for especially for the state of North Dakota, because we do value conformity. We very much value conformity here, and understandably, again, because that comes from our history of settling here. And of course, if you were in a close community that had to protect each other in a lot of different ways, that meant, nobody could go wandering off, and you had to have a lot of that conformity. But I think that that conformity really constrains us in a lot of ways in North Dakota, and creates boxes where we don't really think about how we can change things, how we can do things differently. It's one of the challenges that we have had in the school system for a long time with Native students, a battle we've been fighting for a while. It's like, you can't just say, Native students don't do well in school, and then say it's a failure of Native students that we're not intelligent enough or whatever. It's that the structure of the school system doesn't fit us. And so I've used the story of the elephant and the giraffe before. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that story, but it's a story of this elephant and the giraffe. They live in this little town, and so the giraffe, one day, he's a woodworker, and so he's working in his shop, and he looks out his window and he sees elephant coming down the street. And so elephant has, he's a woodworker too. They see each other around town. So he invites elephant in. He's like, come on in, take a look at this project that I'm working on. Well, elephant starts to go in the door, but of course he can't fit in the door because the door is built for a giraffe. So then he said, well, okay, no problem here. I built these doors to get my equipment in. So he opens up the double doors. So elephant comes in. So they're looking at this project and they're talking shop when giraffe's wife calls down and says, giraffe, you have a phone call. So he goes, I'll be right back. Take a look around, make yourself at home. So he goes up the stairs. The elephant starts looking around. Pretty soon, crunch, he runs into this equipment and bends it all out of place because he can't fit between the aisles. And he feels terrible. He's going to go up and tell elephant about it. So he starts walking up the stairs, and then he crunches the stairs. So he falls over and he's laying in all this, wood and all this crunched equipment, and giraffe comes back down and he's like, oh my goodness, what happened here? And he's like, well, I was trying to make myself at home and then come and tell you. And giraffe said, well, I know what the problem is. It's you're too big for the shop. I'm sure if you take some weight loss classes and come back, you'll be good. And you couldn't get up the stairs because you're not so graceful, but if you take some lessons in ballet, I'm sure that you'll be able to come in and see the place. And so Mr. Elephant sitting there going like, yeah, okay. But anyway, the story, so that's the gist of the story. And the story really shows us about how houses are built, right? And so many times a lot of our structures, such as schools and workplaces, are built from a certain perspective, from a middle class, conformity, North Dakota norm perspective. And those spaces do not make room for people who are other. So one of the things that we've been working on is, how do we change this structure? How do we change the structure of a school system so that it allows for different genders and different identities and different ways of being? How do we change the system so that it recognizes humility and compassion and respect for others for being different, you know, because that's something that we say we value. If we say we value that, then we should build our structure accordingly. So those are I think that those are the perspectives and the things that we've been working on, you know, like from a cultural, racial standpoint. And those are the same sort of things that I think we need to work on in terms of two-spirit. So we have this allyship in a sense, right? But on the other side of the coin, when we start doing education and training and we start you know, doing these things where we try to train other people, one of the things that we do is limit ourselves by when we also other ourselves. So you mentioned the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition. I know that they're working on a training model and a training curriculum, which I think is awesome. And I've talked there about, you know, how do we change our sense of training so that we're not training people about other and continually othering ourselves, but how do we train people to look at themselves and what is it in yourself that may inhibit you from being accepting of others? What is it about you yourself that may cause you to be judgmental to the point where you don't want people in your space? What is it about you that makes you resistant to change or resistant to doing things that would mean compassion for other people? So those are the things that I think we have to base all future types of trainings on. And I've said this before, you know, like, I know I've been part of workshops. I'm still part of workshops where I'm talking about Native people as, you know, as our, you know, as other, you know, because that feeds my ego need, right? Like, I want to talk about my culture and I want to talk about my tribe and I want to talk about who cool we are. But at the same time, if I don't do my due diligence and saying, well, okay, now you tell me a little bit about you and where does your perspective come from and where are your roots and how does your roots impact who you are? Then I'm not, you know, I've come to realize then that I'm not really doing a full training. I'm just feeding my ego needs. What I need to do is ask people to think about themselves and examine themselves, because that's the only way that we're going to build a compassionate world. And I think part of this whole conversation is, how do we build a compassionate world? So sorry, I get on my soapboxes and I just get, sorry.
You're doing great.
We have limited time. So.
Well, everyone, does anybody have any questions for me before I go silent? I'll be listening to Ming and Dr. Cheryl, but I'd be happy to answer any questions before I head out to my appointment.